It was late on a humid summer evening in July 2021. Essex, Maryland, a quiet suburb outside Baltimore, was still and heavy under the glow of orange streetlights. For Officer Douglas, a veteran of the Baltimore County Police, it was supposed to be another routine patrol, another night of pulling over cars with expired tags, maybe issuing a few warnings, maybe towing a vehicle or two. Before we begin, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more interesting true crime stories. So that night, what began as a mundane stop would unravel into one of the most haunting child abuse cases in Maryland's history. Around 11 p.m., Douglas noticed a black Honda Accord idling suspiciously near the corner of Eastern Boulevard. Its license plate was expired, and the car appeared to have been swerving slightly in its lane. He flipped on his patrol lights, the red and blue flashing across the dark asphalt, and the vehicle slowly pulled over. Inside was a woman, 33-year-old Nicole Michelle Johnson, slim, fidgeting, with an uneasy expression. She rolled her window down, and Douglas approached with the calm routine of a man who'd done this hundreds of times before. "Evening, ma'am. License and registration, please." Johnson hesitated. She fumbled through her glove compartment. Her voice wavered. Something about her demeanor struck Douglas as off, but he pressed on with standard procedure. That's when he noticed it. At first, it was faint, a strange, sour smell carried by the muggy summer air. But as he leaned closer toward the vehicle, it grew stronger, an unmistakable stench of decomposition. Any officer who had worked crime scenes knew that smell instantly. It wasn't garbage. It wasn't spoiled food. It was human. Douglas's instinct screamed. He shined his flashlight toward the back of the car. Nicole shifted uncomfortably in her seat, as if anticipating what might come next. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, "what's in the trunk of your car?" Her reply was bizarre. Calm, almost attached, Nicole muttered, "You don't want to know." Backup was called. Within minutes, another officer arrived. Together, they asked Nicole to step out of the vehicle. She complied, but her eyes darted nervously as they moved toward the trunk. The moment the latch clicked and the trunk lifted, the smell hit them like a wall. Both officers staggered back, gagging, and then the flashlight beam landed on something that froze them in place. A suitcase. Beside it, a plastic tote bag, both partially sealed, both swarming with maggots. When the officers unzipped the suitcase, the sight was unbearable. The small, decomposed body of a child. In the tote bag, another, 2 children, 2 lives, hidden in the dark trunk of a car. As officers processed the scene, Nicole Johnson made a statement so chilling it would later appear in headlines nationwide. When told her vehicle would be impounded, she smirked and muttered, "It don't matter. I won't be here in 5 days. Y'all are going to see me on the news making my big debut." And she was right. The discovery would soon dominate local and national media, leaving communities in Baltimore and Dayton, Ohio, where the children had once lived, in shock and grief. The children were quickly identified. Joshlyn Johnson, just 7 years old. Larry O'Neill, her younger brother, only 5. Both severely malnourished, both weighing no more than toddlers. The autopsy would later reveal the cruel reality. They had been dead for months, possibly over a year in Joshlyn's case. Nicole Johnson, their own aunt, the woman entrusted to care for them, had been driving around with their remains in her trunk as if they were luggage. This wasn't just a crime. It was a nightmare, and it was only the beginning of a story filled with family betrayal, systemic failure, and unimaginable tragedy. Before we dive further into the horror of what happened, it's important to pause, because behind every headline, behind every courtroom document and police report, there were 2 children, 2 lives full of promise. Joshlyn Johnson was just 7 years old, a bright, lively girl who neighbors in Dayton, Ohio, remembered as curious and playful. She loved to ask questions. She loved to laugh. Her great-uncle called her a doll baby, small, gentle, with big eyes that sparkled whenever she was around family. Her younger brother, Larry O'Neill, was 5. He was a quieter one, but always followed his sister's lead. If Joshlyn giggled, Larry giggled too. If she ran toward the playground, he was just a few steps behind. Together, They were inseparable, two children bound by innocence and the kind of bond only siblings share. Family members recalled afternoons of watching them play in the yard, carefree and full of life. To them, Joshlyn and Larry weren't statistics in a true crime story. They were kids who loved cartoons, kids who once dreamed of birthday cakes and school days, kids who deserved so much more than the fate that awaited them. In 2019, their mother, Nicole Johnson, faced a difficult choice. Life had grown complicated, and in search of stability, she moved from Dayton, Ohio, to Baltimore, Maryland, with no easy childcare options and pressure mounting. She made a decision that at the time felt like the best path forward. She entrusted her two children to her older sister, Nicole Johnson. Nicole assured her family she could care for Joshlyn and Larry. She promised she'd make sure they were fed, clothed, and safe. Nicole believed her. After all, Nicole was family, blood, someone who should have been a safe harbor for two children. It was supposed to be temporary, just until Nicole could get on her feet, find work, and provide a steady home. But months turned into years, and slowly, distance and silence began to stretch between the mother and her children. The cracks began showing early. The children were never enrolled in school in Maryland. No teacher ever took attendance and noticed their absence. No pediatrician logged their weight or health concerns. They had, in a tragic way, vanished from the systems meant to protect children. Back in Dayton, their grandmother, Nicole Johnson, worried constantly. She called Nicole. She asked about the kids. Sometimes the calls were answered, other times ignored. She eventually called Child Protective Services, pleading with them to check on her grandchildren. She even reached out to police, raising alarms that something wasn't right. But nothing came of it. No welfare checks. No intervention. Joshlyn and Larry were effectively invisible, hidden behind the walls of Nicole's home, and later hidden in her car trunk. So who was Nicole Johnson? She wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. She wasn't some faceless predator. She was family, a woman entrusted to protect her niece and nephew. But Nicole was struggling, unemployed, facing eviction, and spiraling into instability. Court records later showed she often moved between addresses. She told investigators she was overwhelmed, that she couldn't handle them. But none of that excuses what she did, because at the very least, Nicole could have asked for help. She could have called her sister. She could have returned the children to their grandmother in Ohio. Instead, she chose secrecy. She chose silence. And ultimately, she chose to let Joshlyn and Larry waste away in the shadows. Joshlyn should have been starting second grade. She should have been learning multiplication tables, drawing pictures in art class, and running across the playground. Larry should have been in kindergarten. He should have been discovering storybooks, making new friends, and holding his big sister's hand as they walked to class together. But they never made it. Their futures were stolen before they had a chance to dream them. When police later opened that trunk on Eastern Boulevard in Essex, they didn't just find two decomposed bodies. They found two childhoods erased. This is a story not of faceless names in a police report, but of Joshlyn and Larry, two children who deserved love, protection, and a chance at life. And instead, their story would end in silence, hidden in the back of a car. Every crime has a timeline, a chain of moments where, if something had been done differently, lives might have been saved. For Joshlyn and Larry, that timeline stretched from 2019 to the summer of 2021. 2 years filled with warning signs that were tragically missed. In 2019, their mother, Nicole Johnson, was struggling. She had moved from Ohio to Maryland in search of better opportunities. Like so many single parents, she faced a painful choice: work to build a future or stay home and risk losing stability. So she turned to the one person she thought she could trust, her sister, Nicole Johnson. Nicole promised she would take care of the kids. She promised she'd keep them safe until Nicole could get back on her feet. With that decision, Joshlyn and Larry moved in with Nicole. It was supposed to be temporary, but temporary turned into permanent. By the start of 2020, red flags were already visible. The children had not been enrolled in school. No teachers ever raised alarms because there were no teachers to see them. Pediatric checkups stopped. Doctors weren't monitoring their growth, their health, or their well-being. Family back in Dayton grew concerned. The children's grandmother, Nicole Johnson, tried repeatedly to get updates. She called Nicole. She called her daughter Joshlyn. Sometimes she reached them. Other times she was met with silence. In early 2020, Michelle reached out to Child Protective Services and even contacted the police, telling them she feared for her grandchildren. She begged them to check on Joshlyn and Larry, but nothing came of her calls. That failure, that silence, would echo painfully in the years to come. Court documents later revealed Nicole's own account of what happened next. In July 2020, she claimed Joshlyn stole food. Nicole admitted she became angry and struck the child. Joshlyn fell, hit her head, and, according to Nicole, never recovered. Instead of calling for help, instead of dialing 911, Nicole did nothing. She wrapped her niece's small body, placed it in a suitcase, and left it in her car. For months, the exact details remain uncertain, but investigators believe Joshlyn may have been dead for over a year before police finally found her. That left Larry, the younger of the two. By early 2021, he was living alone with Nicole, without his sister, without his mother, and without anyone to notice his fading presence. In May or June of 2021, Nicole told police that Larry went to sleep one night and never woke up. No medical care was sought. No explanation was ever given for how he died. She placed his body in a plastic tote beside his sister's suitcase in the trunk of her car, and then she continued on with life, driving, parking, moving around Baltimore County, all with two decomposing children in the back of her car. During these months, back in Ohio, family members were desperate. The grandmother had not seen her grandchildren since December 2019. She later described it as heartbreaking. She called authorities again, this time with even more urgency, but still no one acted. Bureaucratic walls, miscommunication, and systemic failures meant Joshlyn and Larry remained hidden. In February 2021, their mother Joshlyn arranged to meet Nicole to take her children back, but Nicole never showed up. It was a missed opportunity, one of many. By the summer of 2021, Nicole Johnson's own life was unraveling. She faced eviction, unpaid bills, and mounting stress. On July 28, 2021, she was pulled over in Essex, Maryland, for driving without valid registration, tags, and insurance. She was facing fines, potential towing, and arrest. But inside her car, hidden from the world, was something much darker. When the officer leaned in and smelled that unmistakable odor, the entire timeline, 2 years of neglect, 2 years of silence, came crashing down in a single moment. The children who had vanished off the radar of schools, doctors, and welfare agencies were suddenly back in the public eye. But by then, it was too late. This was not just a crime of one night. It was a slow unraveling of a promise made in 2019. A promise to care for 2 children broken at every step until tragedy became inevitable. The smell of death is something you never forget. For the Baltimore County officers on the night of July 28, 2021, that odor was the first clue that what should have been a minor traffic violation was about to become a nightmare. When the trunk latch clicked, officers braced themselves. The heat of the summer night poured in, carrying with it a suffocating stench. Inside, the beam of flashlight revealed 2 containers. Ordinary objects at first glance, yet their contents were anything but ordinary. A black suitcase zipped tightly shut. A plastic tote bin, lid clamped down but not sealed well enough to stop the smell or the flies. The officers looked at each other, grim recognition in their eyes. With shaking hands, one unzipped the suitcase. Inside was a small, fragile body, a child, bones and skin softened by months of decomposition. They turned to the tote. When the lid lifted, the scene repeated. Another tiny body, surrounded by insects, wrapped hastily as though discarded. 2 children, 1 suitcase, 1 plastic bin, both victims of neglect and betrayal. Autopsy reports would later paint a devastating picture. Joshlyn Johnson, 7 years old, weighed only 18 pounds at the time of her death. That's less than what most toddlers weigh. Stark evidence of severe malnourishment. Larry O'Neill, 5 years old, weighed 21 pounds. His condition mirrored his sister's. Frail, emaciated, deprived of nutrition and care every child deserves. The medical examiner determined that Joshlyn may have been dead for over a year before her body was found. Her bones suggested long-term neglect. Larry, by contrast, had died only a couple of months before the discovery. Both children had been robbed of their futures long before officers opened that trunk. What stunned officers even further wasn't just what they saw, it was what they heard. Nicole Johnson stood nearby, watching as her niece and nephew's bodies were uncovered. And when told her car would be towed, she delivered a chilling line that would later dominate headlines. "It don't matter. I won't be here in 5 days. Y'all are going to see me on the news making my big debut." It was part prophecy, part confession. In that moment, Johnson seemed almost attached from the horror unfolding, as if she knew her name would soon be etched into infamy. The discovery sent shockwaves through the department. Officers hardened by years of homicide cases described it as one of the most devastating scenes they had ever encountered. Baltimore County Police Chief Melissa Hyatt later told reporters, "This is a devastating incident. Our community is shaken and our officers are shaken. No one should ever have to see what they saw that night. Even seasoned crime scene technicians struggle with the sight and smell of 2 small children treated as garbage." The images would linger long after the scene was cleared. Nicole Johnson was arrested on the spot, charged initially with multiple counts of first-degree child abuse resulting in death. She was transported to the Baltimore County Detention Center. As she was processed, her calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the horror in her trunk. Court documents noted she even attempted to explain the timeline casually. Joshlyn had died after hitting her head in 2020. Larry, she said, simply went asleep and never woke up a few months earlier. To investigators, her tone seemed almost rehearsed, as though she'd been preparing to tell this story. But none of her explanations could mask the reality. 2 children were gone, and the aunt entrusted to protect them had instead hidden their remains. News traveled fast in Baltimore County. By dawn, the story was on every local channel. Neighbors in Essex described disbelief. How could a woman drive around for months with 2 decomposed bodies in her car? One resident told reporters, "I can't wrap my head around it. That was somebody's child. That was 2 children. How does this even happen here?" Parents across the county clutched their children tighter. For many, the case wasn't just about a distant crime. It was a reminder how easily vulnerable children can slip through the cracks, unseen, unheard, until it's too late. This discovery was the breaking point. The moment 2 invisible children missing from schools and absent from the system were finally seen again. But by then, they were gone. And the question haunting Baltimore and soon the nation was simple. How did it take this long? When the story broke in Baltimore, it was immediately devastating. But hundreds of miles away in Dayton, Ohio, the news cut even deeper. Because for the family there, these weren't just headlines. These were their babies. Michelle Johnson, the children's grandmother, had been worried for years. The last time she saw her grandchildren was December 2019. She hugged Joshlyn and Larry, watched them laugh and play, and believed she would see them again soon. But she never did. In 2020, when months passed without contact, Michelle's instincts told her something was wrong. She called Nicole repeatedly, asking to speak to the kids. Sometimes Nicole brushed her off. Other times, she ignored the calls entirely. Michelle didn't stop there. She called Child Protective Services in Baltimore. She even called the police. She warned them that she feared for Joshlyn and Larry's safety. But nothing happened. Her pleas were recorded, but no official action followed. When reporters later interviewed her, she was blunt. "I called the police department. I called Protective Services. I did everything I could. Nobody helped." Her heartbreak was mixed with rage. To her, the system had failed her grandchildren. For their mother, Nicole Johnson, the grief was suffocating. She had trusted her sister to keep her children safe while she worked to build a better life. When Nicole never returned the children in 2021 as planned, Nicole began pushing harder, but by then it was too late. After Nicole's arrest, Nicole's pain spilled onto social media. In one post, she wrote, I trusted her with my babies. I'll never get to see my kids again because of a mistake I made in trusting my sister. It was a raw confession, part guilt, part grief, all wrapped in a wound that may never heal. Deschelle would later describe her sister's betrayal as the worst kind of punishment because it wasn't just the death of her children. It was the fact that they died in the care of someone who was supposed to love them. In Dayton, family and neighbors gathered to remember the children not for how they died, but for how they lived. At vigils, candles lit the night sky. Photographs of 2 smiling children were placed beside flowers and balloons. People remembered Joshlyn as sweet and full of energy. Larry was remembered as a little shadow who adored his big sister. One neighbor told the Dayton Daily News, "They were just beautiful kids, very lovable. They didn't deserve this. Nobody deserves this." The Ohio community's grief was heavy, but it was also mixed with anger. They had seen signs. They had raised concerns. And yet the children were allowed to slip away. Back in Baltimore, the community's reaction mirrored Ohio's pain. Parents held their children closer. Many asked the same haunting question. How could 2 kids disappear from schools, from doctors, from society, without anyone noticing? Reporters pressed child welfare officials for answers. How could CPS ignore the grandmother's calls? Why weren't the children flagged for not being enrolled in school? The agency cited confidentiality, but admitted the case was now under review. For many, those answers weren't enough. Baltimore County residents demanded accountability, not just for Nicole Johnson, but for every crack in the system that allowed Joshlyn and Larry to be hidden for so long. Nicole Johnson, the grandmother, didn't hold back when speaking to reporters. She said both her daughters, Nicole, who killed the children, and Deschelle, who left them in Nicole's care, bore responsibility. It was a bitter truth. To Michelle, the family had fractured long before the traffic stop, and now 2 children were gone because of choices made and chances missed. Her voice shook as she told Fox 45 Baltimore, "The last time I saw them, they were happy. Now I'll never see them again. I did everything I could, but nobody listened." It was a statement that carried both sorrow and accusation, aimed at the system, at her daughters, and perhaps at herself. This wasn't just a tragedy in one family. It became a tragedy for 2 entire communities, Dayton and Baltimore. Both left mourning, both left asking questions, both left haunted by the same conclusion. Joshlyn and Larry should still be alive. The horrific discovery in July 2021 shocked Baltimore, but it was only the beginning of a long legal journey. From the moment Nicole Johnson was arrested, every court appearance, every filing, and every whispered detail became part of the story the public followed closely. A case that was as much about seeking justice as it was about exposing the cracks in a system meant to protect children. The night of July 28, 2021, Nicole Johnson was taken directly to the Baltimore County Detention Center. She was charged with 2 counts of first-degree child abuse resulting in death, felonies carrying up to 40 years per count, unlawful disposal of the body, failing to report the death of a minor, other lesser charges tied to neglect. From the start, prosecutors made clear this wasn't a simple neglect case. This was child abuse, deliberate, deadly, and prolonged. At her bail hearing, Johnson appeared disheveled and calm, showing little emotion. The judge ordered she be held without bond. The seriousness of the charges, coupled with the gruesome facts, left little room for leniency. Court documents quickly revealed what Johnson had told police the night of her arrest. She claimed her niece Joshlyn had died after hitting her head in 2020. The result, she admitted, of an altercation where she had hit the girl for taking food. Instead of seeking help, she said she put the body in a suitcase and left it in her car trunk. She explained Larry's death as something that just happened. He had gone to sleep one night, she said, and never woken up. Again, no medical attention was sought. His body was placed in a tote beside his sister. Her tone, as noted by investigators, was disturbingly detached. To prosecutors, her words weren't just explanations. They were confessions of neglect that had crossed into abuse. As 2021 turned to 2022, investigators worked to build their case. Autopsy reports highlighted the severe malnutrition of both children, prosecutors emphasized how they weighed less than toddlers. They prepared to argue that this wasn't just negligence. It was starvation, abuse, and concealment. Family testimony added to the case. The grandmother, Nicole Johnson, told investigators she had repeatedly called CPS and the police. The mother, Joshlyn, admitted she had left the children in Nicole's care, but had tried to get them back. To the prosecution, this showed that Nicole had actively prevented the children from being seen or returned. Meanwhile, the public defender assigned to Johnson suggested she was overwhelmed, unstable, and incapable of handling the responsibilities she had taken on. It was an argument meant to mitigate, but it couldn't erase the reality. 2 children were dead during 2022 and 2023. The case occasionally resurfaced in the press whenever new hearings took place. Each time, headlines reminded the public of the grisly details. 2 children found dead in aunt's trunk. Public outrage never fully subsided. Baltimore County residents demanded accountability. In Ohio, where the children were remembered as doll babies, every update from the courtroom was carried by local outlets. The question on everyone's mind was, would Nicole Johnson face trial for murder, or would she accept a deal? In August 2024, after 3 years behind bars awaiting trial, Nicole Johnson entered a courtroom in Towson, Maryland, and changed her plea. She stood before Judge Nancy Purpura and pleaded guilty to 2 counts of first-degree child abuse resulting in death. By pleading guilty, Johnson avoided the uncertainty of a full jury trial on potential murder charges. But the charges she accepted were still serious, each carrying up to 40 years. Prosecutors signaled they would seek consecutive sentences, ensuring decades behind bars. For the families, the guilty plea was a bittersweet moment. It spared them a lengthy trial and the pain of reliving every gruesome detail in open court. But it also meant there would be no dramatic day of testimony, no chance to see Johnson cross-examined on the stand. From August 2024 to early 2025, the case entered its final stage, sentencing. Johnson remained jailed without bond, awaiting her fate. Prosecutors prepared victim impact statements. Family members readied themselves for a final day in court, a chance to speak directly about their pain, their grief, and the children they had lost. And the community, after nearly 4 years of waiting, braced the answer to the final question. How many years will Nicole Johnson serve for the deaths of Joshlyn and Larry? By the time February 2025 arrived, anticipation was heavy. The courtroom would soon hear a prosecutor call the crime scene a nightmare. The judge would soon decide whether Johnson would ever walk free again. But before we get to the sentence, let's pause, because the weight of this case wasn't just in its legal process. It was in the haunting details of what happened to 2 children and the failures that let it happen. After nearly 4 years of waiting, the courtroom in Towson, Maryland, filled with a heavy silence on the morning of February 10th, 2025. Reporters lined the benches. Family members clutched tissues. Prosecutors shuffled thick case files. At the center of it all sat Nicole Michelle Johnson, the woman who had promised to care for 2 children, only to let them waste away and hide their bodies in the trunk of her car. Judge Nancy M. Purpura presided over sentencing. Her black robe contrasted sharply against the pale wood of the Baltimore County Circuit courtroom. She looked down from the bench with an expression that was stern, measured, but not without weight. Nicole Johnson sat at the defense table, her head lowered, her hands pressed to her face. Some reporters later wrote that she hid her face in her palms, as if trying to disappear from the eyes of the court. Behind her, family members of Joshlyn and Larry sat silently, their grief filling every corner of the room. When it was time for the prosecution to speak, Assistant State's Attorney Kirsten Brown rose. She didn't waste words. She described the discovery of the bodies as a nightmare, one that would stay with the officers who found them forever. She reminded the court of the condition of the children. Malnourished, skeletal, stuffed into a suitcase in a tote like discarded trash. This was not a momentary lapse in judgment, Brown said. This was 2 years of neglect, 2 years of abuse, 2 children robbed of their futures, and a concealment so callous it shocked even veteran officers. Her words hung in the air heavy, leaving no doubt about the prosecution's position. Nicole Johnson deserved no mercy. Johnson's public defender rose next. She painted a picture of a woman overwhelmed by responsibility, unequipped to care for children, spiraling under poverty and instability. She asked the court to consider Nicole's mental state, her struggles, her inability to cope. But the weight of the facts was too great. Poverty doesn't explain months of silence. Struggle doesn't excuse hiding bodies in a trunk. The defense's plea for compassion was noted, but it was clear the court's patience was thin. Then came the victim impact statements. The children's grandmother spoke through tears. She told the judge how she had called CPS, how she had begged for someone to check on Joshlyn and Larry. She described the heartbreak of never seeing them again after 2019. The children's mother, Deshelle, didn't speak in person, but her words were read aloud from a written statement. She confessed her regret for ever trusting her sister. "I'll never see my kids again because of a mistake I made in trusting Nicole. I thought she would keep them safe. She didn't." The courtroom was silent as those words echoed. Silent except for the muffled sobs of family members seated in the gallery. Finally, Judge Purpura spoke. "This court has seen many difficult cases," she said, her voice firm, "but few as disturbing as this one. 2 children were entrusted to your care, Ms. Johnson. 2 children who relied on you for safety, for nourishment, for love. And instead, they suffered neglect so severe that it took their lives." She paused, then delivered the sentence. Nicole Johnson was sentenced to life in prison, with all but 50 years suspended. Effectively, she would serve half a century behind bars. At 36 years old, it meant she would likely spend the rest of her natural life in prison. As the sentence was read, Johnson buried her face in her hands. She did not speak. She did not look at her family. She did not apologize. For the prosecution, it was justice served. For the family, it was closure, but a painful kind. No sentence could bring back Joshlyn or Larry. No punishment could erase the years of neglect or the images of how they were found. As the courtroom emptied, one family member whispered to a reporter, "At least now, they can finally rest." News of the sentence spread quickly. Local headlines read, "Baltimore woman sentenced to 50 years after police find bodies of 2 children in her trunk." Judge calls case a nightmare, hands down half-century sentence. National outlets echoed the horror. International press used words like grisly and unimaginable. The world once again remembered the names Joshlyn and Larry. For the first time since 2019, there was a sense of finality. Nicole Johnson would not walk free for decades. Justice, though imperfect, had been delivered, but in that same breath, a haunting truth remained. 2 children had slipped through every safety net, and no sentence, no headline, no courtroom speech could change the fact that Joshlyn and Larry were gone forever. When Nicole Johnson was let out of the courtroom in February 2025, her fate sealed for the next 50 years. The story did not simply end. For Baltimore, for Dayton, for families across the country, it left behind haunting questions. Questions that echoed far beyond the walls of courtroom. At its core, this case was about trust. A mother trusted her sister with the most precious thing in her life, her children. She believed Nicole would keep them safe, feed them, raise them with love until she could take them back. That trust was betrayed in the most devastating way possible. This betrayal struck a chord with parents everywhere. Because if you can't trust your own family, who can you trust? How many parents rely on relatives to babysit, to watch their kids for weeks or months, believing blood ties will guarantee safety? The Johnson case forced people to ask, is trust enough, or should we demand accountability from everyone we leave our children with? The case also exposed cracks in the systems designed to protect children. Child Protective Services. The grandmother called. She raised alarms. She begged. Yet nothing happened. Schools. Neither Joshlyn nor Larry were enrolled in Maryland schools. Why did no one notice their absence? Why wasn't there a mechanism to flag children who simply disappeared from the classroom system? Law enforcement. When calls were made, why wasn't a welfare check conducted? Could a simple knock on Nicole's door in 2020 have changed everything? For many, this wasn't just a story of one woman's cruelty. It was a story of how an entire network of institutions failed to act, leaving 2 children invisible until it was too late. Defense attorneys argued that Nicole Johnson was overwhelmed, impoverished, and incapable of caring for the children. And while poverty often plays a role in neglect cases, the details here went far beyond hardship. Malnourishment so severe that children weighed less than toddlers. Bodies hidden in a trunk. Silence maintained for over a year. These weren't the actions of someone simply struggling to make ends meet. They were choices that crossed into abuse and concealment. Still, the case sparked debate. How many other children live in unstable homes right now, unseen by schools or doctors, slipping through the cracks because poverty isolates them? From Baltimore to Dayton, the public reacted with fury. In Baltimore, parents demanded answers from child welfare officials. In Dayton, neighbors lit candles and cried over photographs of smiling children who would never grow up. Across the nation, online forums and social media exploded with outrage, not just at Nicole Johnson, but at the system itself. Many asked the same chilling question. If this could happen here, how many other children are suffering unseen? Often forgotten in the headlines are the officers who made the discovery, veteran policemen and women, some with decades of experience, described the scene as the worst of their careers. The smell, the sight, the realization that they were unzipping the bodies of children. Those images don't fade easily. Police Chief Melissa Hyatt acknowledged this publicly. Our officers are shaken. No one should ever have to see what they saw that night. Behind every case file are first responders who carry scars the public rarely sees. And yet, amidst the horror, one theme mattered most. Remembering Joshlyn and Larry not for how they were found, but for who they were. Two little kids who once played in the sunshine in Ohio. Two kids with nicknames, laughs, favorite toys. Two kids who deserve birthdays, classroom friendships, and futures. Local coverage in Dayton called them doll babies. Family members remembered Joshlyn's curiosity and Larry's quiet devotion to his sister. For many, the lesson of this case was simple but searing. Behind every statistic, behind every tragedy, are children with names, faces, and stories that must never be forgotten. This wasn't just a case about crime. It was a mirror held up to society, forcing all of us to ask whether we are paying enough attention to the most vulnerable among us. Their mother believed she was doing the right thing. She believed leaving her children with her sister would give them safety and stability while she got her life together. It was a decision born out of trust. But trust, in this case, was shattered. Nicole Johnson didn't protect her niece and nephew. She didn't feed them, nurture them, or love them. Instead, she let them wither. And when they died, she hid their small bodies in a car trunk, not for a day, not for a week, but for months. The story forces us to ask, how well do we really know the people we entrust our children to? And how do we guard against betrayal that can come from the places we least expect? But this case wasn't only about one woman's choices. It was also about silence. The silence of a system that should have acted. The grandmother called police and protective services, begging them to check on her grandchildren. She was ignored. Schools never flagged her absence. No one followed up when two children vanished from classrooms and doctor's visits. Joshlyn and Larry weren't just betrayed by their aunt. They were abandoned by the very safeguard society promises to its children. The reflection is harsh but unavoidable. If warnings had been taken seriously, if welfare checks had been done, maybe they would still be alive. When news broke, two communities mourned. In Baltimore, where the discovery was made, parents hugged their kids tighter. In Dayton, where Joshlyn and Larry were remembered as doll babies, neighbors lit candles and shared memories. The grief was shared, but it also carried anger. Anger at Nicole. Anger at a system that misassigns. Anger at the idea that children can vanish so completely until it's too late. And yet, beyond the anger, there's something even more important. Remembering Joshlyn and Larry not for how they died, but for who they were. Joshlyn, 7 years old, playful, curious, full of questions. Larry, 5 years old, quiet, gentle, following his sister's lead, looking up to her with the pure devotion only a younger brother can have. They were children who should have been in classrooms, on playgrounds, blowing out candles at birthday parties. Instead, their lives were cut short before they even had a chance to dream about the future. The story of Nicole Johnson is more than a crime report. It's a warning, a reminder that vigilance matters, from parents, from families, from schools, from systems designed to protect. Because when warnings are ignored, when children vanish off the radar, tragedies like this can happen again. And the lesson? Love is not enough without action. Trust is not enough without accountability. Promises are not enough without follow-through. In the end, what lingers isn't just the smell of decomposition in the trunk of a car. It's the silence of two children who should still be laughing, running, and growing today. Nicole Johnson will spend the next 50 years behind bars. But for Joshlyn and Larry, there is no second chance. No appeal, no parole. They are gone, and the world is left to carry the weight of their story. The case of Nicole Johnson will haunt Baltimore and Dayton for years to come. Two children, Joshlyn and Larry, who should have been chasing dreams, ended up silenced in the most unthinkable way. Nicole is now behind bars, sentenced to 50 years. But justice in a courtroom does not erase the pain in a mother's heart. It does not answer the grandmother's haunting question, why didn't anyone listen when I called for help? And it doesn't change the fact that two young lives were lost, lives that could have been saved. So, dear viewers, what we take away from this, that sometimes danger doesn't come from strangers. It comes from those closest to us. That love without accountability is dangerous. That systems meant to protect children can fail if we don't demand they do better. And most of all, that remembering Joshlyn and Larry is more than just telling their story. It's making sure we never ignore the signs when children go missing from classrooms, from doctor's visits, from our everyday awareness, because silence can be deadly, and ignoring warnings can cost lives. The images of that night in July 2021, the police lights flashing in the Essex darkness, the suitcase and toad in the trunk, the officers recoiling from the smell, will never fade from those who were there. But what must also never fade is a memory of two little ones who once laughed, played, and dreamed in Ohio. Joshlyn and Larry deserve to be remembered not as headlines, but as children. If this story moved you, don't let it stop here. Bell subscribe to your channel name for more deep dives into true crime stories where justice and tragedy collide. Thumbs up like this video if you believe Joshlyn and Larry's story deserves to be remembered. Speech balloon and in the comments below. Tell us, what do you think needs to change so tragedies like this never happen again? Your voice matters. Sharing stories like these keeps the memory of victims alive, and it shines a light on the failures we must never repeat. Until next time, remember, every case is more than a crime story. It's a reminder of how fragile life is and how vital it is to protect those who cannot protect themselves.